Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I hope you all are having a fantastic week. Thank you for joining Matt and I today as we discuss two reports within our system, PivotGrid and the Resource Allocation Report 2. We're really excited to bring this to you. We have a lot of questions come in on reports, which we absolutely love. So we definitely want to show you how to build your own, see what some of the options are, see best case scenarios or best use cases for each, I should say, and kind of go that direction. So with that said, Matt will be presenting today, and he will be presenting in a version 6.0 environment. Just want to make that known in case you notice anything that maybe you don't have access to. And then additionally, some users may not have access to the report management screen, and that has been determined by your administrator. So if you're not seeing access to that, please contact your system admin, and they can either give you the permission to do so or can explain why maybe you don't. With that said, Matt, I am going to hand it off over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam, for that. And hello, everybody. I'm Matthew Baker. I'm a support lead over here at Prosymmetry, and I'll be conducting today's webinar, going over two of the major reports that a lot of our clients work with, that being the PivotGrid, as well as the RAR2 report or the Resource Allocation Report 2. So those are primarily the most heavily used and kind of focused on reports within Tempus. So I want to make sure we set up some time so we can go over some of the core functionality, the ins and outs of those different report writers, and what particular information you're going to see within there. Besides that, we will also be briefly covering some of the security options and permissions around there. So that should be relatively brief, but it's very important to know, especially as more resources and users are building out your reports, and you want to be able to share them with people or hide them from, or not share them, or give other people access. It'll be really important to be able to know how to do that. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to exit out of here real fast. And from my screen, I'm in my local environment, like Sam was saying. This is on version 6.0. So if there's anything that you don't see, it's most likely because you may be on an out-of-date version. And if that is the case and you're looking to upgrade, please feel free to reach out to Samantha and she'll be able to coordinate with you. Okay, so with that being said, to start things off, I first want to cover some of the security options around reporting within Tempus. And this is going to be strictly related to the administrators within your system who have access to kind of control the permissions. So I will keep this brief since not everyone on here may be an administrator, but the permissions that will be governing your ability to access and edit and create reports will be within admin settings here. And then if we navigate over to role management, on this global role tab, as you can see up here in the top right, if we scroll all the way over to the right, you will see this permission called access reports. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to create a new role real fast, just so we can see the different options. And so within this particular option, there will be 3 different options to choose from. If we hit on this edit icon for one of your roles, you will see none, which is essentially going to grant that user no access to report management. So that tile won't even be displayed when they log into Tempus. The second option that you have is edit. This will essentially give them full edit rights to the reports within Tempus, so they'll be able to create and use all the report writers, as well as view any of the shared reports that may have been shared with them. And then the last option we have is a view option. So this is going to give them kind of no control over creating reports within the system. They will still be able to log in, navigate to report management, and view any shared reports that they may have, but they won't have any ability to make edits to any of the reports, as well as make any new reports within report management. So it is important to know these 3 options that you have available. This is relatively new. It used to be kind of you have access or you don't, and it's relatively new that we added the ability to just give view access. So if that is a permission that you're looking to set up for your users, you can absolutely go ahead and do so. So with that being said, that's all really on the reporting permission side of things. It's going to be granting you the access to report management. So I'm going to select up here in the top right-hand corner on the Tempus icon to go back to the home page. And then to actually start viewing your inventory reports, as well as all the reports you have access to, and create new reports, you're going to want to head to this report management tile down here in the bottom left-hand corner. So when you do select on this tile, there's a couple important things to note. First is you do have 2 separate tabs available to you first you'll have this mine, and by default you're going to be navigated there. So this is going to be showing you all the reports that you have created within Tempus. So all these reports down here, my test reports and demo reports, these have all been created by this particular account and will be displayed within this mine. However, if you want to view any reports that you have access to, so that will include all the reports that you've created, some of the system-wide reports such as the timesheet status, audit, and skills matrix report, and then lastly, any of the shared reports that other users may have shared with you. You'll want to navigate to this All tab, and you'll see all of those available reports within there. So there are a couple icons within this grid as well to be aware of. You will see that you can hover over each one, and it'll tell you the type of report it is. You can also see the name of the report, the source model, so where the information is pulling from, a description if one has been provided, who is the owner of the report, when it was created, the last time it was updated, as well as, or when it was updated and who updated it last, and then when it was updated last as well. And then you also have two options within here to clone an existing report, as well as delete an existing report. So very important to see some of these different options, know that they are available to you if you need to delete or clone or work with any of these, as well as you should be able to sort your particular reports based off of any of the column headers, as well as there is report searching capability up here in the top right. And before we get into PivotGrid and RAR2, I do want to mention that there are some additional options up here for the report list, which is the view that we're on, report folder, as well as report access. We will be covering those very briefly towards the end of today. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that you do have a couple more options up here in the top right. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the first report writer that we'll be working with, and that is going to be the PivotGrid. So the PivotGrid is going to be very similar to a Excel pivot grid or pivot chart report that you may have typically worked with. It's very useful, very effective when you're trying to pull in kind of the raw information. So say you want to see particular hour values being assigned, or FTE, or maybe capacity of your resources, anything that you'd have that kind of grid-like format where you have a table that's kind of dictating the information that you're trying to display. It will be a great fit to use the PivotGrid report within here. So when we do navigate to one of our report writers, and this you'll see as we go through the RAR2 report, it will look relatively similar. You'll be kind of structured with this 3-tabbed report generator, and on the first tab will always be general. And within here, it's going to be pretty straightforward on what we're trying to define. First, we'll have to put a name of the report, and let's just say I want to see allocation by project and then by resource. We can go ahead, give the report a name. Optionally, you can also provide a description. So you do not need to provide a description within a report, but a lot of the times it is always good to provide a little bit more information. So if someone else is utilizing, they get an understanding of what is being displayed. So I'll just say viewing allocation at a monthly level by project and then by resource. So a nice description will help you kind of formulate and kind of give it a little bit more, just so you can kind of stay on track and know exactly what the report is doing, especially when you start building out 5-10 reports, and the naming conventions may be similar, and kind of you get maybe a little lost and you lose track of what each report is doing. So definitely great to provide a description if you can think of one. And then the last option we have here is source model. So this is not something we've covered in a webinar recently, but as everyone's aware, we do have the what if scenario planning, where you can go to the modeler, build out some different scenarios, and work with and start playing around with that information and kind of that sandboxy kind of feel. So we do have that, and you do also have the option to report off of any of the models you've created. So let's see if I've created any. So I do have one model, which is my demo model. So if I wanted to report off of the information in that model, you do have the option to do so, as well as you can always choose to report off your live data. So in most cases, I would make the assumption that live data is what you're going to stick to, especially if you're not using that what if scenario planning. But as you become more mature and you start utilizing the what if scenario planning and you're creating more and more reports, there's always that option to start reporting off some of those models and seeing what the information looks like in a different format. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and stick with live data. And with that being said, I'm going to head to the second tab, which is my Dimensions tab, which is where you're going to be structuring the overall report. So down below, we have a multitude of different options that you can pick and choose from to add into the report. So starting from the top, we have our date dimensions, and if we expand that, we have our date year, date month, date quarter, date week. So a lot of date dimensions to kind of help format the report and essentially time phase the information that you're pulling in. We also provide a multitude of different project dimensions. So this can include your project name as well as your task names. If you're utilizing milestones, you can bring in some of that information as well. The start and end dates of your projects. If the project is a proposal, if you're utilizing the workflow, you can bring in that name. And then one of the most important options within here that I see a lot of clients typically gravitate towards is their project custom fields. And within project custom fields, it's just going to be the list of all those custom attributes that you've created within your system. So this will be very useful if you're trying to aggregate by a particular custom field, maybe get a subtotal based off of all the projects that belong into a particular group. Maybe it belongs to a particular owner or is a particular priority. If you want to group together that information, you can absolutely use any of the attributes that you've created within here to do so. So just like on the project side of things, and I'm just going to go ahead and collapse some of these, free up a little bit more space. You also have the same sort of options on the resource side, so you can bring over your resource name. We see we have our resource custom field, so if you want to break up the allocation by one of these fields instead of the name, such as maybe what department they belong to or the particular role within the organization, you can always use any of these custom fields, bring them into the report, and then segment that information that way as well. So I'm going to go ahead, collapse resource custom fields, and lastly, you have two options within here as well. If you want to focus on if they're demand planning or not, or if they're enabled within the system or not. So you do have those two options if you're looking to essentially group your projects or your report by that way as well. So we will quickly glance over some of the additional options, but I just want to say that you do have option or the ability to focus on the financials within your system, your resource requests. If you're utilizing timesheets, you'll have a multitude of timesheet options, first based off of the period and where it kind of falls, as well as the dimensions themselves within the timesheet, such as the status of the timesheet, what project it belongs to, the task, the owner of the timesheet itself. So a lot of different options that you can really start utilizing based on how you're utilizing the system. And then the last dimension we'll be covering is going to be the snapshot dimensions. So this is really going to pertain to clients that are utilizing the snapshotting functionality within project management. So if you do wish to report off of those, you will strictly be utilizing these snapshot dimensions down below. So you can see a lot of the information looks kind of repeating, and that's purely based off of it's trying to read the information based off the snapshots that we're taking, not the project itself. So if you're looking to report off of snapshots, they'll have their own list of dimensions down below, as well as their own list of measures and measures that you can interact with. So if that is something you're looking to utilize and you want to report off that snapshot information, I would definitely recommend kind of restricting yourself to dimensions only found within snapshot dimensions. Any other report, you should be able to utilize the options that we just covered up above. So if we're going to build out maybe a pretty basic report, let's say we wanted to see our resources first segmented by the particular department they're on, and then we want to see the resources themselves, and then lastly the projects that they're currently working on. What we can do is we can go up here in the top, expand resource dimensions, go to my resource custom fields, and let's say I just want to drag and drop department in here. So this is going to essentially so the first level when we generate this report for the rows is going to be at that department level. Next, we want to see our resources within each one. So I'm going to go here, find my resource name, and just drag and drop that into rows. And then lastly, I want to see the projects that these resources are assigned to. So I'm going to go to my project dimensions up above, expand project/task names, and just drag and drop project name into rows as well. Okay, and then let's say I also wanted to segment this information out a little bit more, and I want to see this by each individual month for the particular years. So what I can do up above in here in date So that can expand date right here. I can drag and drop date year into columns. And then lastly, I can drag and drop month and date month in the columns as well. So once you kind of have the structure of the report that you're trying to generate and have an idea of what you want it to look like, the final step will be to pull in the information that you want to see within the report, or kind of the measure that it'll be working off of. And that will be found down here at the bottom within measures. So these are going to be reflecting kind of the allocation and capacity information within your system. So as you can see, towards the top, we have some options for our resource-based capacity as well as our resource net capacity. And then we have a multitude of different options for our planned and actual allocation, the demand, remaining for those, as well as if you're using some of the preference options, you can report off of those as well. So what I'm going to do is I want to see the planned allocation within my system. So I'm going to expand planned allocation, and then you'll have options to choose between hours, cost, FTE, as well as man days. So within here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to click on planned allocation hours and drag and drop that into measures. So once you do that, it will generate kind of a preview of what the report will look like over here on the right-hand side. As you can see, we have our departments being listed over here on the left. So we have our empty column, which is resources that are not currently assigned to a department within the system. And then you'll see the hours that are assigned to them. You also have all of our customly defined departments, so our accounting and finance, human resource management, marketing, production, purchasing, as well as research and development. So any of those departments in this case that have allocation assigned to them through one of the resources will be populated within here. So it will be working based off of existing values. So let's say, for example, we had department, let's just say IT, and none of my resources were assigned to the IT department. Or I had resources assigned, but none of those resources were assigned any allocation in this case. Essentially, that value wouldn't be pulled over because all the values would result in zeros, and we're going to be looking for instances where information is available, not where it's set to 0 in this case. So just want to kind of clear that up so you're aware if you don't see one of your particular options available, it's most likely because there's no information based off the measure associated to it. So that's the first level. We can see department here. But if we drilled, you will have options to drill down based off of the other rows that you have defined. So if we wanted to see the resources that belong to a particular department, we can expand human resource management. Then you can see all the resources that are in that department. And then if you want to drill down even further and see the projects that those resources are working on, you can go ahead and let's say we expand Jan Cooper to see the 3 projects that Jan is currently allocated to. And then lastly, you can do the same thing on the column side of things. So we can see date year right here is our top level. So we're seeing the years broken out that way. However, we always have the option to expand that as well to kind of get the monthly feel to see, okay, January, February, March, and so on, and then all the allocation assigned down below as well. So you do have a lot of options to work with the information in here. You can continuously add more rows and columns if needed, as well as you can kind of play around and switch where the date dimensions may reside or where the row, what your rows may be. So you have a lot of options within here to kind of change the look and feel of the report and what information you're trying to pull in. Okay, so with that being said, there's a couple more things I want to cover within the kind of rows and columns down below. And one that is very important is the ability to filter off of particular information. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this option up here to collapse all my information, kind of bring it back to the initial state. And as you can see, we can see all of the departments and the allocation that is being pulled in. But let's say I wanted to focus on maybe only a particular or a couple departments instead of all of them. What you can do is if that particular, what you're trying to filter off of is already defined as a row or column within the report, you can always select on it right here. And then it will give you a drop down with a lot of a multitude of different options, such as the ability to sort this by ascending or descending order. You can sort by ascending or descending order by grand total. You can limit to the first X amount of resources, or in this case, departments. So say we only want to see the top 3 departments, we can go ahead and do so by using this limit to first option. as well as you have two options down here for filtering, which the first one will be choose values, as well as filter string. So I typically recommend using the choose values. I think it's a little bit more straightforward to use. When you select on it, it's going to bring you up kind of a modal window showing you the options and which ones you and pick and choose which ones you want to see within here. If you're more of a string-based person, you want to just say, I want to see this particular department, or I want to see this department, then add another filter to show a different department. You can actually absolutely do that as well. But in this case, I'm going to focus on the choose value option, which in here, I'm going to deselect it. And let's go ahead and say I want to work with accounting and finance and marketing. And before we leave this window and apply this filter, I just want to let everybody know that you do have searching capabilities up here at the top. So if I wanted to look for purchasing, we can go ahead and do it that way. One of the main differences, or something that just to be aware of, is I know filtering in Excel will essentially work where you have everything selected, and if you say purchasing in this case, and if I were to hit apply, essentially purchasing would be the only one that's being displayed. So that's not the case. So we're not going to be deselecting values if they're hidden when searching for those particular values. So if you want to really limit down to just a couple, I would definitely recommend deselecting all and then looking for those couple departments in this case that I want to see. Let's say accounting, as well as, let's say I want to see purchasing. Okay, and then here I'm going to hit apply. And so what that will do is that will now filter the report on the right, showing me only those two departments in this case. So all the resources below those other departments have been removed from the report, and we're purely focusing only on these two particular departments. So that's how you will filter on the report for one of your existing measures. However, if you want to filter based off of kind of a measure or dimension that is not defined within here, you absolutely have the option to do so as well. So let's say I want to focus once more on my resource, but I want to focus on the resource's position. So position is currently not defined as a dimension on the rows or column side, so we won't be able to just select into it and bring and filter based off that information. However, let's say I wanted to filter based off position role. I can go ahead and just drag and drop it down into filters. Once it's initially brought in, nothing's really going to change within the report. However, I now can select on position role. I see the choose values or filter string option. Go ahead, select on choose values, and let's say I want to only see consultants as well as developers. So once I go ahead and apply that change, you will see my allocation on the right has drastically decreased because we're filtering out a majority of the resources that were previously in there. Okay, and then the last option I want to cover on kind of this configuration side are calculated measures, and we'll very briefly cover this, but this is just an additional option to kind of manipulate some of the information that you're pulling in. So up above, you will see that we have a list of measures. However, sometimes there are particular use cases or particular scenarios where you want to kind of change the information that you're pulling in and base it off of your measures. One of the ones I typically see is they want to see the difference between planned allocation and actual allocation. So if that is something you're interested in and you're utilizing the measures and you don't see that particular option, you can create your own measure using this calculated measures option. So to do so, we can expand this and select on add a new dimension. And so this will be broken up into two parts. First one is where you're going to be defining kind of the definition of the measure, and then down below is the name. So I'm just going to go ahead and just create a new one. I'll first provide the name it planned allocation hours minus actual allocation hours. Okay, so once you have the name defined, then you can start kind of with the formula of that information. So what we're going to want to do is up here in the measures area, we want to find the measure that we want to work with. Let's say planned allocation hours in this case, and just drag and drop it here. And then I'm going to go ahead, just add a mathematical operator for subtraction. And then I'm going to find my actual allocation hours and just drag and drop that down. And then once you have that set up, we can go ahead, hit save. That will create the measure down below. and then you can utilize it within your reports. So unfortunately, my system doesn't have too much actual allocation in it, so you're not really going to see any differences between here. However, this will be using that kind of new formula that you've created within here instead of just bringing over planned or actual allocation. So very useful if there's particular scenarios that you're looking for, as well as once it's created, you won't have to continuously recreate that. You should be able to see that option in reports that you create in the future, as well as other users will be able to see any of those calculated measures as well. And with that being said, I'm going to go up here to the last tab that we have available, which is going to be layout. And this is just going to be changing kind of the look and feel of the report. So the information within here will still stay the same. However, you can kind of change some of the additional options that you have. So you have the ability to change kind of the left header as well as top header layouts. So if we're working on the left header, in this case, you can see when we drill in, it kind of has this kind of little space in between to kind of show it's going down. But let's say we wanted to change that to maybe look more tabular. And so you can change it that way, or maybe wanted to change it to outline and change it just a little bit more. So you do have options to change both the left as well as top header layouts. You can change how multiple measures are defined. So in this case, we have two measures, our planned allocation hours, as well as our calculated measure. And by default, they will be stacked kind of side by side in columns. However, you can also do side by side in rows and kind of stack them on top of each other instead of next to each other. The next four options are going to be designating positioning, as well as if subtotals or grand totals are available for rows and columns. So we do enable subtotals and grand totals by default, and the default options are displayed down below. But you can also change the positioning. So if you want the subtotal maybe to be at the bottom instead of the top, you can absolutely change that, as well as if you want to choose not to see subtotals as well, you can also disable them within the report. So very similar options will be within rows, totals, positioning, and columns. The rows are going to be top, bottom, or none, and then the columns are going to be left, right, or none. And then the last option you have within the layout is going to be the ability to provide a heat map within here. So this heat map is going to be focused on some of the lower levels of the report. And to set one up, all you have to do is select Add New. And then from here, you can select the gradient. So let's say we wanted to see green. And then you'll specify kind of a position or a threshold within here. So this is based off of hours. So let's say for every month, if I see anything over or from 0 hours to 100, it should be green. And then you can kind of go through continuous steps and fill out those thresholds where needed. So let's say anything from 100 to 160 will be yellow. And then lastly, anything above 160 will be red. We can go ahead, set up that heat map, and then you should see that information displayed over here on the right. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and save the report. And once you do so, you can you should be able to navigate back here at any point in time, view the report with those filters applied and everything that you're seeing, as well as these will continuously be updated based off of new allocation that is put in the system. So if new resources are added that belong to one of these departments, or new allocations are assigned to your existing resources, those will be updated within the report the next time that you navigate to it. Okay, and then lastly, I just want to cover a couple more options up here in the top right. So we do have some formatting options available. One is the decimal places that you want to see. So by default, this is going to be 2. However, you can change that to be 1 or 0, depending on how you want to see this information. You also have alignment options. So by default, it will be aligned to the left, but you can change it to a center alignment as well as a right alignment. And then you also have expand all and collapse all options. Just so you're aware, if you hit the expand all, you get prompted with this modal window asking you if you want to expand all. So if you have a relatively large report, I would advise not using the expand all. However, if you have a smaller report that you want to just expand all and see all the information, you can absolutely do so. And if we hit yes, you can still see it loaded relatively quickly, since it is a relatively smaller report. But once it's thousands of lines long, then that may raise the issue there. Okay, And then the last two options I want to cover is one, we have export options. So you will have 5 different export options within here. First one being export to Excel, which is going to export it to an Excel file, as well as we have export to Excel flat data, export to CSV, export to CSV flat data, and export to PDF. So in this case, export the Excel and export the CSV, and then the respective flat data as well. These reports are going to be generated relatively similar, and they will look basically identical. It's just going to be changing the format of those files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this to Excel real fast, as well as I'm going to export it to Excel flat data. And then lastly, export the PDF to see what that looks like. Okay, so within here, I'm going to open up this report that has been exported. We'll just give it a second to load. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to enable editing. And so this first example that we're seeing here, I believe is and let me change this so I'm a little bit more familiar with this. And I'm going to change this to side-by-side columns instead and re-export those. So I'll do Excel flat, as well as PDF. And that one may take a little bit longer to load since there's a little bit more information within there. But while that is exporting, I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Perfect. So what we're seeing here is going to be kind of the flat data file that we've generated. So when you're doing the flat, when you export it as the flat file, essentially each row within the report is going to equate out to its own row within the file. So we can see we have a department, the resource name, the project name, and then the allocations associated to it. If we scroll over to the right, be able to see where those allocations reside. So we're going to see that very mirrored throughout the entirety, where it's just going to be making sure these values are defined and then exporting it that way. Whereas if we open up, for example, the regular Excel file, you'll see that it's going to be more structured, kind of more similar to how the report is actually displayed within Tempus. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just expand all. So just like we see in the Tempus side of things, we kind of have it grouped here where we only see accounting and finance once. We see the resources that are defined. We see the projects that they're working on, and then over here on the right, you see kind of the overall information that is being assigned in the allocation. So they're going to be slightly different formats for each one, and it's going to be kind of personal preference on what you prefer. I typically like the flat file a little bit more than the regular Excel, just because it gets the information, explains in each row, and allows to be filtered and worked with a little bit easier. But this one, the positive to the Excel file, like we're seeing here, is if you're focused on subtotals and grand totals, those will be displayed. As you can see, we have a subtotal column, as well as if we scroll down to the bottom, we should see a grand total, whereas those may not be displayed when you're doing the flat file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to close out of all of these Excel files. And then lastly, I want to just open up the PDF. So the PDF is going to export exactly what you're seeing on the screen. So this will take it into account if you've expanded or collapsed any of the rows. So if you really are focusing on one resource, we can collapse all, and let's say we wanted to focus only on here and see Don's information for these given years. If I were to export this, I would just see this information. I wouldn't see any of the individual resources outlined in purchasing. However, if I want to see everything and export it as PDF, it's going to export all those given rows like we saw in this PDF file. Okay, and then the last thing I just want to mention within this report is the ability to also apply runtime filters. So within the PivotGrid report, as we saw when we were editing the report, we did apply some filters this way, where we applied a filter on the department as well as the position role. Those filters will persist every time you come back into the report, so you won't have to continuously apply them. However, We also have these additional filtering options up above, which are going to be more of your runtime filters. So these are going to be based off of your existing measures or dimensions within your report. So we can see department, resource name, project name, as well as date. So if you want to apply a runtime filter, what we can do is, in this case, we can select on resource name. It'll show us all the resources that are being pulled in here. And let's say we wanted to focus only on Beverly and Donald. You can go ahead and hit apply. And so now you will see that only those two resources are displayed. So the big difference between these ones, though, is if I were to essentially navigate away from here and come back, you will see that those filters are no longer, or they're being applied. However, if I were to see Control F5, you will see that next time I come back and the cache has been cleared, my resources are back and the filter is no longer applied. So these are very useful if you're just looking for a particular resource and don't want to change kind of the structure of the report. You can go ahead and apply one of these runtime filters. Next time you come back into the report, you should have it back to its initial state. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back now, and that covers the PivotGrid option that you have available. A lot of different options to play with, a lot of different dimensions and measures to work with to kind of build out the report that you're looking for. So so far we've primarily focused on a kind of grid-centered report. However, we do have some graphical reports within Tempus as well. And the one we'll be focusing on next is the RAR2 chart. So I'm going to go ahead and open up RAR2 and create a new one. I'll just name this RAR2 chart. And just like we saw before, we kind of have a 3-tab layout. And the first one is always going to be basically the same for general, where you can provide a name, an optional description, as well as the source model that you want to report off of. Next, we have the configuration tab. This is going to be slightly different than what we saw before. This is going to be kind of pretty high level, how you want the information to be structured within here. So in this case, if we want to, we can first pick kind of the time granularity you want to focus on. And in my case, I want to focus on month. Next, you can choose the unit of measure. So you can switch between hours, cost, FTE, as well as man days. In this case, I will focus on hours. You also have the option to optionally define a start and end date of the report. So if you do not define one of these and a start and end date, essentially we'll just pull it based off of your existing information based on the configuration of the report. But if you wanted to more so just restrict it and say, I only want information from in 2020, I can go ahead and do so, providing that start and end date of the report. And then lastly, there's two options down below to show grid lines and show series numbers. I'm going to leave these enabled for now. And then as we generate the kind of preview of the report, you'll be able to see where those are displayed and what kind of what these are governing within the report itself. So once we have that config tab set up, we can go to data series, and this is where you're going to specify the information you want to see within the report. So when you navigate here, it will essentially be blank. However, we can head over to data set right here, and then you'll see a multitude of different data sets you can choose from. So we include allocation, your demand data, your base and net capacity information, some calculations between allocation and demand, net availability on both the allocation and demand side of things, as well as you can reference your preference option if you're utilizing that as well. So we'll have a couple different options to work with, but in my case, I'm going to work with allocation. So when you go ahead and add allocation or any data set into the report, it will generate a preview over here on the right, displaying your information. So right here, we filtered this report to only show January through December of 2021. So that's why we're only seeing these 4 months or 12 months. We also said we wanted to view this at a monthly level. So this information is going to be stacked at a monthly level. And then within here, you can see that we have bars representing our projects that are being pulled in. So once you add that series and you have that preview, you can then start kind of augmenting the information and how you want it to be displayed. So the first option right here is you can determine what data set you want to see. So it's going to default to planned. However, let's say we wanted to focus on actual allocation instead. You can go ahead and change that, and you can see kind of the small amounts of actual allocation that I have within my system. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to switch this back to planned since there's a little bit more allocation to work with. You also have the option for remaining, which will be the difference between your planned and actual allocation, and you can look at it that way as well. Outside of that, you also have the ability to filter based on project and resources. So your filters will vary based off of the information that you're looking at. So in allocation sense, it is associated to both project and resource. So you will have filtering options in both cases. However, let's take, for example, capacity. Capacity is associated to the resource. However, there's no association between your resource capacity and the project. So the project filterings will not be available if you're working on capacity or something along those lines. So these will vary, but in most cases, you will at least have one filtering option. In allocations case, you have two. So you can select on project. You can go in here, find any of your project custom fields you want to filter off of, as well as if you want to filter based off of just individual project names or task names. I would recommend using this project/task names option. And then within here, you'll have that kind of modal window once more, where you can pick and choose the projects that you want to include within your report. So just like on the project side, you have resource filters as well. It's going to be relatively similar. You have the ability to pick and choose any of your resource-centric attributes, as well as there will be resource name in this case if you want to focus on the individual named level. So outside of that, you also have the ability to control kind of how this information is being displayed. So by default, it will be displayed as a bar chart. However, you can also change this between a line chart as well as an area chart, depending on how you want this information to display. In this case, I'll stick with the bar chart. And then you also have options to add in an additional kind of gradient on top of it. So if we wanted this to be kind of have horizontal lines or maybe dashed lines, you can go ahead and do so, which will be very useful when you go ahead and add additional measures that may have the same kind of look and feel to them. Next, we have some additional options to how we aggregate this information within here. So as you can see, right now it's aggregated by projects, and I'm seeing all the projects up here at the top, and each bar is representative of an individual project within Tempus. However, what if I wanted to change that to be by resource instead? I can go ahead and select on resource, and so now this information is going to be displayed by my resources instead of my projects. So I'm going to switch this back to projects real fast. And then next, we have some additional options on how we want this information to be grouped together with over here on the right. So first is going to be the order. So this can be either independent or grand total. So grand total is going to take the overall amount of hours being asked for within here. And what I'm going to do to make this look a little bit nicer is I'm going to go up here real fast, go to my project names, and I have these resource request projects that are taking up a bunch of allocation as well as a test project. So let's remove all these. And this should look a little bit cleaner now. So now we're seeing kind of my individual projects. They're more uniform within each other. And we're bringing over that information. So we're going to stack it that way instead. Filtered out a couple more of those resources, some of those projects. However, this order is going to allow you to kind of choose if you want it to be a grand total or independent. So when it's grand total, it's going to look at the entire time frame and then group your projects based off of where they fall overall within this time frame. So in this case, Aurora Phase 15 has the most allocation assigned throughout the entirety of 2021. And then following that would be Barracuda Phase 9, and then Bender Phase 1, and so on and so on. So that's what grand total will do. Independent is going to more so just shape it based off of the individual, in this case month. So in this case, we can go down below, and then the projects that have the most allocation within this given time frame, in this case January 2021, is going to be displayed at the bottom. And then as you go up, it's going to be the second, third, fourth, and kind of so on. And so that will be done in each individual monthly level, showing you which projects have the most allocation that way. So I'm going to stick to grand total in this case. And next I'm going to choose to stack my information. So far we've only seen this information kind of stacked at a project or resource level, but you do have the ability to stack this by any of your attributes as well. So if I just change stack by attribute to, let's say, maybe the current phase of the project, what we will see over here now is the information. Instead of seeing just the projects, we're now seeing the phases that we have within Tempus, and then our allocation essentially being aggregated by these particular phases that they belong to. Next, you have a top limit. So this will come into play more so if you're focusing on maybe on primarily projects or resources and the names, and you're stacking it that way. But this top limit is essentially going to allow you to choose X amount of projects to come into the report. And then if you want to include particular projects or resources or groupings within here, if there are above that top limit or they don't fit within there, you can do so as well. So let's say if I change this to 3 instead of 10, we can now see we have phase 1, 2, and 4 since they have the most allocation overall. And now phase 3 is not included, as well as that empty has been removed and is being grouped into this other category. And so this top is going to define where that other category sort of starts within here. And then include rest is going to choose to include this other category within here if you want it. So let's say we didn't care about that other category. We only wanted to focus on the top 3 phases in this case. We can go ahead, disable that. And now you can see that other category is no longer displayed within the legend, as well as it's been removed within the report. So a lot of options to play around with in here. Very quickly, outside of the first kind of time frame we set, you can also set a time frame for the particular data set itself. So maybe we only wanted this to display 2021 for January to April. You can effectively remove any of the information after that while still keeping the overall time frame of the report the same. As well as additionally, you can select on this series name if you want to rename it to something else. So let's say planned allocation from 1/1/2021 to 4/30/2021. So you can go ahead and rename that, give that different name, just to maybe give a little bit more information on what's actually being displayed by that. So once you have that set up, what you can go ahead and do is hit add series. That will add that into the report. And then next, 1 second, let me save this. And then next, what you can do is go ahead and go to the data set once more, and then add an additional series within here. So the power of this report comes from being able to add additional series on top of the ones you've already created. So in this case, we've added allocation on the plan side of things. Let's say we wanted to add the capacity of our resources. We can either find our base or net capacity within here, add it to the report, and let's say we wanted to display this as a line. And let's say you just wanted an overall total. So instead of seeing like we saw before, where it was going to be more so stacking this information, we're going to go ahead, just aggregate this by none so we can get all the resource capacity within our system. Go ahead, add that series to the report. And so now we have a capacity line showing you, okay, are we over or under capacity during these given months? And then you can continuously move further. If you want to start filtering some of the information, you can. Let's say we wanted to add another allocation, but instead this time we want to focus on our actuals, so we can compare our actuals versus our plan, and if they're over or under allocated during those times, we can go ahead, add that series to the report, and kind of go through the same steps to do so, adding more and more information based on what you're trying to view. So once that's set up, what you can do is go ahead and hit save, and that will save that report and allow you to come back here at any point in time, see what that would look like based off of what you initially configured. So one last thing, or two things I want to mention is one, each one of these series does have additional options. So if you want to clone, edit, or delete any of your existing data sets within here, you can absolutely do so. As well as you do have the option to essentially export this to a PDF file by selecting on this export option up above. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to go back to the report management, and the last topic I just want to briefly cover is report access. So as you create reports, initially these are only going to be available to you. However, you do have the ability to share your reports with other users within the system. So if we head up here into the top right where it says report access, and go ahead, select on there. And then within here, you'll see a list of all the reports that you have created within Tempus. And then you can pick and choose if other users have the ability to view or edit the reports that you've created. So let's say I wanted to share my allocation by report or by project and resource with all administrators within the system. I can go to Report Viewer, select on this option, and essentially share it with all administrators within Tempus. And that will essentially give them access to the report that you have created. And then you can take it one step further as well. If you want to grant them access to actually make edits to the report that you've created, you can go over here to Report Owner, hit on the same option, and let's say administrators will have access to edit that as well. So very important as more and more come in, if you want to share it. A lot of the times what I've seen people do is once they share a report, it will share kind of what it looks like right now, but if they want to make edits, but they don't want to disrupt the report that you're working on, once it's shared, they'll find that report within this All tab and then simply make a clone of it. So then essentially they're the new creator of that report. It's the same thing that was sent to them, but then they can go through and make, or now you can go through, make edits to the report without impacting the initial report that was shared with you. Okay, with that being said, that will conclude today's session going over the PivotGrid report and RAR2 chart. Just to quickly reiterate, the PivotGrid is going to be kind of that flexible grid style report where you can work with different dimensions and measures and pull in that information similar to what you would see in Excel. And the RAR2 chart is going to be more of a graphical representation, focusing on your resources, allocation, and capacity, and the ability to continuously add additional data sets to kind of really build out that robust report that you're looking for. That being said, I'm going to pass back over to Samantha. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate your time here today. So we had a few questions asked, and some of them are very, very use case specific. So I will be reaching out to those individuals directly to answer those questions. If you are watching this and you take the time to kind of explore a little bit more on your own, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Definitely here to help. A few just cleanup items to close this out today. A recording of this exact webinar will be in the Tempus Online Help Center within the few days. I would say probably by Friday afternoon under the Tempus University tab there. Feel free to share this webinar with other users, anyone who may need to know how to build reports. We really want to make sure that your users are finding value in this as well. And then I also sent a link in the chat to sign up for our upcoming webinars as well. On our website, under resources and then webinars, we have links to all of our upcoming Tempus University webinars. I believe the next one is in 2 weeks. So we're really excited to host that for you all, and we hope to see you there. In the meantime, if anyone has anything, please reach out, but I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.